Welcome to this specialist factual session, and we're going to be asking today, what is it that makes specialist factual special in 2016? All our panelists have brought some clips of unseen material, so you're going to get plenty of chances to see the kind of thing that they're actually commissioning that's upcoming. And we're going to be talking about kind of everything, really, from innovation and how they use talent to how you punch through, risk-taking, convergence, and obviously we'll be asking for questions from you at the end of the session. So I'm just going to introduce everybody, which is quite a tall order since we've got two people new in post, hot off the presses. So let me start with John Hay, newly appointed commissioning editor, head of specialist factual for Channel 4. Rachel Jobe, who is director of programs for History and H2. Ed Sayer, VP for Production and Development, Factual at Discovery. Lucy Willis, commissioning editor, Factual at Channel 5. And last but by no means least, in post since Friday, he is now no less than head of natural history and specialist factual commissioning at the BBC. So that's really fantastic. Thank you for coming in at such short notice.
Pleasure.
Much appreciated. So first question, I'm going to kick off with John. I want all of you to really just very quickly tell me what for you embodies what you think is a great modern specialist factual program.
You want me to pick one show?
Yep, one show.
Okay, God, I haven't got this. I haven't done what no one else has done. But I've picked one that's one of ours, but not one of mine. It's Guy Martin's Wall of Death, commissioned by Sarah Ramsden, made by North One. To me, an exemplar. I mean, it's a beautifully made bit of live broadcasting, really textbook example of it. But an exemplar because it's unbelievably exciting and compelling and emotionally engaging, and it's got all the things that make a good TV program. So it's got narrative, people you care about doing something that matters to them, you know, actuality, stuff at stake, an ending you stick around for. But it also delivers enormous amounts of content, massive amounts of content. And it's none of that. I really hate this kind of idea of smuggling content. I think it's slightly insulting to the audience. It suggests you're trying to sort of spike the drink, as it were. And what that show had was content that sort of added to the pleasure. So, you know, you needed to know it in order to sort of, you wanted to see him do his thing. So in order to do that, you needed to know the physics and what the pipe was made of and all of that sort of stuff. It's the ultimate show, not tell. So that for me is the ultimate. It was
great watching the Gogglebox families watching it as well. It was fantastic, sort of from behind their hands.
And it's great when guys celebrate with a cup of tea. That's very Guy Martin thing to do. But it's exactly where we want to go.
Okay, thank you. Rachel, how about you?
So I was, obviously Ruth, gave us a bit of heads up about this question, and I've been thinking about it all weekend, and I actually really struggled. And I don't know if that means that the state of specialist factual is obviously terrible, or I've just not been watching enough TV. But I sort of went back in time, and actually I've landed on something that actually was on my channel, but commissioned by one of my US execs, and it was a few years ago, and actually Channel 4 did buy it as well. It's called 102 Minutes That Changed America, and it was an archive-based show about 9/11. And it was literally wall-to-wall archive. And this is what, UCG was a kind of a banded about phrase about the time. But everything in the show was filmed by people on their mobile phones. And bear in mind, this is, 15 years ago? And also news footage. And there's no VO. It's just wall-to-wall archive. It's really, really powerful filmmaking. And actually, they are rebooting it and adding 18 minutes of rediscovered archive footage now for the anniversary in September. But I think in terms of specialist factual and making it really, really riveting viewing, I think that's a really, really good example.
Classic program.
Yeah.
Ed?
So I didn't struggle like you, I don't think. A show popped straight into my head, which was The Murder Detectives on Channel 4, made by Dave Nath. And I think what was really extraordinary about that short mini-series was we've all made cop shows. I guess a lot of you guys have as well. I used to do Cops with Cameras on ITV, and there are so many different ways of doing a cop show, but I think Dave really reinvented the wheel and used a completely different narrative structure to tell those stories. And
when you say different narrative structure, just elaborate on that a bit.
Well, he was very clever. So there were no sit-down interviews in the show, and what he did was when he interviewed people, he did it. He just sat down informally with them with no camera and put down a DAT player and recorded them that way. And as a result, you got a very, very different thought process and interview process, which was then underlaid under the pictures, and it transformed a kind of what am I trying to say? It transformed, for me, the police narrative.
So just sort of what could have been a very dry subject.
Absolutely.
Made it into something absolutely
Made it
compelling.
incredibly powerful, and it really, and I think this is what Specialist Factual does at its very best, is get you into the heart of the characters there, so you can truly identify with them.
We'll talk about how you do that a bit later on. Lucy, what takes your fancy?
Well, I'm going to mention two, but I'm going to do both very briefly, so hopefully I'm allowed that. One's one of ours and one is someone else's. So we recently transmitted a series about Henry VIII and his 6 wives. And for me, you know, it had incredibly exciting drama. It's sort of that area where recon is now, with certain Specialist Factual, beginning to actually switch into drama. So I thought the drama in that was really powerful, very modern. I'll talk about the casting a bit later, actually, which was quite interesting and quite innovative. A two-hander from 2 presenters I love. One, you know, we launched on the channel, Dan Jones, and the other, Susanna Lipscomb. And it just felt like a sort of fresh, modern take on quite a familiar story. And I'm just going to mention very briefly Space Live, which Arrow made for Channel 4 a couple of years ago now. And I just thought that was an extraordinarily brilliant piece of programming. So ambitious, so exciting, edge of your seat, and a very sort of modern way. You know, you'd have had the history of space sort of 10 years ago. Now we had Space Live, which was brave and incredibly exciting.
Oh, thanks.
You've done well out of that one. Tom.
He's going to do even better. I would have said Wall of Death as well. I thought really hard about it, and actually, I think it took me a while to come up with a title, not because Specialist Factual isn't in brilliant shape, actually, because I think there is so much brilliant Specialist Factual around. But what really stood out for me with Wall of Death was exactly what John said, actually, which is it wasn't just spectacle for the sake of it. And I think spectacle's very, very easy to achieve. If you think about it, you can go and film very, very big things for a very, very high budget. But I think Wall of Death had a real sense of purpose. And I think one of the things that we're all looking for in Specialist Factual, and this is probably true of every television genre, but it feels quite acute with Specialist Factual, is how do you draw people through the entire viewing experience and get them to stay with it? And I think John's totally right when he says you absolutely had to watch Wall of Death and stick with it to the end. And if I was going to cite one of our own titles, which, again, I didn't commission, I'm just pulling off John's tricks, I didn't commission it, but it's a BBC commission. I thought the Tim Peake Space, Live from Space film on BBC Two last year was genuinely extraordinary. And I do think what's interesting is when there's 2 kinds of Specialist Factual. One which feels like it tells you something about the world and how the world works, and I think Tim Peake's pieces did do that. But they also told you something extraordinarily British. And I think there is something about Specialist Factual where you can have a collective moment which brings people together. They don't happen often, but when they do happen, they feel really special. And that felt, even though, of course, Channel 4 had done space in a live way, that felt to me like a very, very BBC in a good way take on Specialist Factual.
Thanks. And I think, in a way, what you've chosen really illustrates the kind of eclectic mix of things that come under the Specialist Factual umbrella. And I wonder whether or not the lines are being a little bit blurred these days, that, you know, we used to have these very specific categories, didn't we, for Specialist Factual, sort of, you know, histories, and now the lines are being blurred. You know, does it really... What does a Specialist Factual programme look like to you? I mean, does it matter? Because you have things... I mean, Gogglebox comes out of Specialist Factual, for instance.
I mean, it doesn't... I think it's quite a distinct thing, but not in that kind of GCSE subject kind of way. I mean,
What is it, then?
Well, so for me, it's the genre that explores and explains the world and tries to make you think differently about it. And it's a sort of mode almost. It's a sort of almost a character trait. So Colin Barr, who did the SAS programme, used to say, he's a sort of slightly more docky kind of background person, and he would always say to me, you always want to look around the corner of things. And I think that kind of desire to sort of, how does it actually operate? You know, that's why SAS is as it is, and it's all about, like, what do they do, why do they need to do that, all of that sort of thing. So I think you can apply that filter. I mean, you know, it's something, just to return the compliment, it's something that Tom's done brilliantly on the Beeb with all those kind of precinct-based shows that take Busiest Railway or other sorts of bits of the world that are just inherently fascinating and sort of look down on the anthill from above and say, right, how does this work then? And that's a different thing to just the pure telling a human, you know, the sort of pure human drama of the Doctor's Department or the sort of, you know, or what Fact 10's doing. I mean, one of the nice things about 4 is you can play a bit, you know, and the boundaries are quite fluid. And that's, you know, you've got room, David Glover had room to commission something like Gogglebox, which is, you know, a sort of brilliant, uncategorizable thing. But even with the rest, I mean, there's a bit of borrowing from docs, there's a bit of borrowing from Fact 10, there's a lot of stuff I see in your site that's borrowing from features, you know, there's a sort of, that game is being played, but there's still a sort of coherence of mode, which is to sort of try and say how things work.
Right. What about, I mean, is it kind of wow factor? What is specialist factual for you in the commissioning that you're doing? Is it the sort of the fact that nobody else puts into a programme that makes it specialist factual for you?
For me, I think that everything that we commission has to have a really big question at the heart of it, which needs answering, and the viewers want to find out the answer. I think what John was saying about looking around the corner of things, I think that's exactly right. And all of Discovery's output, I mean, we're kind of, the main Discovery channel is a specialist factual channel. And so right in our DNA is, even in the name of our channel, Discovery, is about discovering and finding out more, and a natural inquisitiveness. And I think when specialist factual works, I think you get to ask some really extraordinary questions.
And that's true for you, Rachel, as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities between what Ed and I do in our channels. I mean, we're both essentially owned by Americans, and Americans don't even use the phrase specialist factual. They say non-scripted. So everything that's not a drama is just non-scripted. So they don't even think, and they talk about buckets, obviously, so they don't think about buckets or themes or genres. So I don't know if we, sometimes we do kind of restrict ourselves by thinking, which commissioner should I take this to, or where does this fit? And certainly I don't go around thinking I commission specialist factual. I don't even think we're necessarily a factual channel anymore. We have lots of drama on the channel, but it's always rooted in history. That's where we come to our programme making from. So, but yes, you're right. I think answering questions is a really, really big important part of what we always do, and it's sort of digging deeper. And also, just one other point is, the channel's 21 years old today, both here and in the US, and it grew up from before the internet, when people used to watch the History Channel to do their, their history homework. And that's obviously changed, because what we really want to do now is kind of just get people excited about something, and then they can look it up on Wikipedia or elsewhere. So it is about posing questions. You don't have to answer them fully.
So happy 21st birthday.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
So, Tom, one of the things that's quite interesting is that on one channel, something will be described as specialist factual, like, say, some kind of medical programs. Trust me, I'm a doctor, for instance. But, say, on Channel 4, you might find that, or Channel 5, that it's described as something else. Does it really matter? I mean, are there more important distinctions, whether you're using formats or live or other structural
the weird thing about the phrase specialist factual, I think about this quite a lot, because when I have to explain to my parents what my job is, they're like, great, sounds amazing. If you think about every other genre, the audience know what documentaries are, they know what a drama is, they know what a comedy is, they know what an entertainment show is. The vast majority of our audience don't go, tonight I'm going to watch some specialist factual. And so I think when I sit on panels to talk about specialist factual, a version of this question always comes up, which is sort of, is specialist factual in crisis? What is specialist factual? And I think partly it's because we're trying to define something which is, like John said, about curiosity, and about I think sort of beyond what John said, it's also, I think specialist factual has the ability to make sense of your place in the world as well. So it's not just explaining the world around you, but explaining how you sit in that world too. So I think, of course, like with dramas, which can go from period drama through to verbatim drama through to immersive drama, I think the thing about specialist factual is, of course, we want to work in live and use formats and sometimes tell documentary stories. And so I don't think there's a barrier. For me, there's not a form barrier when you're talking about specialist factual.
You've talked about specialist factual theatre, haven't you, which is an interesting phrase.
It's old school, that phrase, isn't it? I thought I'd just revive it.
So going back to basics.
No, I mean, I think Guy Martin has a sense of theatre. The Guy Martin piece we talked about has a sense of theatre. I think Big Blue Live, which we did last year, which I guess is natural history specialist factual, I don't know, I guess it is a piece of factual theatre. I think partly one of the things that I try and think about is, I know that when I get home at the end of the day, I am tired, I've been really busy, I'm a bit frazzled. The idea that I would seek out something that is just going to be really educational for me and a really good thing for me to watch is just not going to happen. And that means it's not going to happen for the vast majority of the audience, I think. And so part of what I think we're all looking for when we talk about, should we do something that feels like it's live? Should we do something that feels like it's got more scale? How do we do something that's hybrid drama and factual is? We're looking for different ways of telling the audience, this is worth watching in a world where you could choose to watch lots and lots of other things. Because I think we're definitely, specialist factual at the BBC, I think has really seen huge change very quickly. It's not very long ago that my predecessors would have been talking about what I've always described, I hope it doesn't sound rude, but always described as sort of presenter standing on the top of the mountain. And I think there's absolutely still a huge place and an important place for expert voices, especially at the BBC. I think all our content is driven by expert producers and expert voices on screen. But the audience aren't responding in the same way to the feeling that they're being given what is essentially a beautifully made potted lecture. And so what we're all doing is trying to find new ways of telling the audience. I think what you're trying to do actually is get over the barrier that I probably felt when I was a kid, which is, am I clever enough to watch a science program? Do I understand science? Do I understand history? So you're constantly trying to find ways of saying to people, this is for you, when their gut feeling might be, oh, I'm not sure this is for me.
Okay, well, we're going to come to the first clip, which I know you didn't commission, but it's quite an interesting example of, approaching history in new ways. And I'm going to come to Lucy afterwards, because the subject is the same for a
We can
series you've
compare.
done.
Okay.
We're not going to compare both clips. We're going to
And
show the
contrast.
BBC clip,
Okay.
and then I'm going to ask
Okay.
Lucy about your own. But this is a clip from the upcoming BBC series, Henry VIII and His Six Wives. So if you can show that first clip, please. That's, in a sense, breaking the fourth wall, isn't it? I mean, what is it bringing, do you think, to that?
So I should probably say I saw that clip on Friday for the first time, so I'm probably not the best person to talk about in any detail. But I think what's really interesting about it is, and it's an idea that one of the ideas that I'm really excited to now be able to be part of. But I think it's an attempt to take all the best things from drama, which is emotional storytelling, intrigue, twists and turns, making figures from history who can seem very remote suddenly real before your eyes, and then do something else, which is also bring in layers of expertise, a perspective and a take. And I think and it's not, you can't really see it from that clip, but I think the other thing that's interesting about this project, because obviously there have been lots and lots of projects about Henry VIII in the past, and indeed his six wives, as Lucy will attest to, is that this piece will also, for the first time, give voice to the six wives of Henry VIII. So it's from their point of view. And I think it's an amazing project for Lucy to be doing, because I think she's always had a sense of the sort of the dramatic, the human, and the full-blooded. And this feels like an opportunity for her as a presenter and expert to take full flight.
Lucy Worsley, the presenter, yes.
Yes.
So Lucy Willis.
It's the Battle of the
You
Henry
can take
VIII.
full
Yeah,
flight.
exactly.
Wives, isn't it?
Yeah, so your
Yes.
Henry VIII series, you did some very interesting things with that as well, didn't you?
We did. So we had a series on a couple of months ago. And again, a bit like Tom has just been saying, we really pushed the boundaries again with the drama. It's interesting, isn't it, how, a while ago you used to talk about specialist factual and recon. Now, actually, there's some incredible drama being made in the arena of specialist factual. So we had some very strong drama. The series was made for us by Oxford, and they did a cracking job, I think. But what was really interesting is at Channel 5, we are, very broad. We're a commercial channel, and we're always thinking about ways to attract that broad audience. So when Oxford were thinking about the casting, the decision was made to hire an actor who had been in one of the soaps. So actually we had Charlie, who used to be in EastEnders. Luckily, it turned out he could act as well, so that was quite handy. But it gave some of our viewers, it would have been a disaster, wouldn't it, if he was one of those hammy soap actors, but actually he was incredibly good, I thought. So it was a sort of great entry point for some of our audience who might not naturally have come to history on the channel. And we also decided we'd do a sort of two-hander presenter. So we mixed our drama with presenters. We had Dan Jones, who's one of our big presenters on the channel, our big history presenter, alongside Susanna. And so Dan took the role of Henry and sort of told the story from the perspective of Henry, Susanna from the perspective of the six wives. So it was very much the kind of emotional journey, the emotional roller coaster of Henry and the six wives. It was the sort of, the passion, the blood, the guts, all the excitement.
And are you glad you got yours out first before the BBC?
I have to say,
one came
I
on?
think we're very pleased that we got ours out.
Okay.
Sorry, Tom.
And it wasn't on my mind till Friday. So
So Ed, for you, in terms of what makes specialist factual punch through, do you think that, the form and the format is starting to become at least as important as the content for specialist factual, or is the content still the first most important thing for you?
No, I agree. I think the way you tell the story and the form is absolutely crucial, because I think, just as I mentioned, Dave Nath's film, is that specialist factual is always at the kind of the very kind of the cutting edge, the bleeding edge of innovation in television, and then when that works, that often gets picked up as a device, and then weirdly, that specialist factual ceases to become specialist factual. You could argue that Gogglebox, when it first came out, was specialist factual, and now it feels very populist and mainstream.
Well, it's a very good question, actually. I'd quite like to ask that question. What makes Gogglebox specialist factual, in a way?
The fact it emerged through David Glover, basically. It was, sort of him and Studio Lambert. There's this sort of... Gogglebox is an uncategorizable show. It's a sort of crowdsourced arts review show or an entertainment show or a documentary about families or something. And it's one of the benefits of having a not too rigidly siloed commissioning structure is that you can have these conversations like David and Ralph were having with the team at Studio Lambert, and it emerged out of a conversation about the London riots. You know the story, don't you? That there was a conversation about what if you could watch the people who were watching the riots at that national moment. And then that grew and grew into what we now, watch on a Friday night. So it's a sort of, it doesn't really matter to me what genre it comes out of.
And ideas that are kind of that new don't come along very often anyway, do they, really?
No, but they come along more often if you're not too worried about, trying to sort of stick to your little zone, I think, basically.
But nevertheless, you can have a subject like Henry VIII, and it's that story's been told 1,000 times, but there are new ways of telling it.
But also, I think that when we talk about specialist factual, it's very much the channel that's making it. And so, Discovery, the world's largest commercial broadcaster, we feel that the shows that we produce in this area have to be very big and ambitious and have huge intent. And that doesn't necessarily, you don't always have to have those tick boxes, say in specialist factual and other channels. But for us, it is all about the scale and being able to deliver factual programming that we feel that other broadcasters just can't deliver.
Okay, and on the subject of ambition and scale, we're going to look at a clip from history, Rachel. Just tell us a little bit about this extract from Barbarians Rising before we play the clip.
Yeah, so this is I guess you call it a docudrama, which is possibly having a little bit of a revival at the moment. And this is a big global co-production. So not just me, but my colleagues in the US, Australia, Canada, India, Asia, everywhere.
So it's a big budget for you.
It means, we've all thrown some money together, so we've got a really good budget. It's made by October Films. This is a little bit of a response to the big success we're having at the moment with historical dramas. So Game of Thrones, obviously, history is light, but Vikings, one of our shows, doing really well, works really well on channel, but our factual content is so different. And how do we kind of bridge that gap? And I think what's really important when you talk about audiences and specialist factual is I think you can play with format, you can play with style, but I think the content still has to be really strong and the stories still have to be really strong. And the way that you continue to grow it is to super serve your audience. So we knew that we needed to keep our drama audiences coming back and to say bridge that gap between drama and factual. So this is an idea that came out of a brainstorm that we did. And I'll quickly tell you, it's the story of Barbarians Rising. So the word barbarian is a Roman word, and it comes from they use it to describe rebellions and rebels, and we now think of it as being quite a negative word. Barbarian is a kind of a horrible person. But actually, barbarians at the time really were just freedom fighters. They were being invaded by the Romans, and they were just fighting so they would not be enslaved.
So it's a kind of lesser-known story. Should we take a look at the clip?
It's the kind of the opposite. So rather than the glory of Rome, it's kind of, the fight back, the fall of Rome. So it's telling it from a different angle as well.
Great, thank you. Can we see that clip, please? So that's a high-stakes series, really. What is it about that you're hoping will really punch through for you?
Well, and Lucy sort of referenced using sort of famous faces as well. So Nicholas Pinnock plays Hannibal. He's most recently been in Fortitude on Sky Atlantic. So we've got a few recognisable faces in there, and we've also found that using actors as sort of at the point of their career that they're just on the rise, they're very, very supportive with PR, which is very helpful. So yeah, and also what's really key for us is Sky is one of our partners. We're actually a joint 50-50 company between Sky and A&E. And one thing that Sky don't do a lot of is Specialist Factual. And so they look to their partner channels like us and Discovery to sort of fill that gap. So if something like Barbarians Rising for them, they're already saying this is something that's amazing. This will drive subscription for us. We'll support you with marketing. So we'll kind of double our dollars on the marketing side as well. So there's a lot of opportunities for us to push that forward and drive new viewership to the channel.
Okay, so there is this sort of, obviously, a lot of docudrama, big history stuff. Let's think about other aspects, other trends in Specialist Factual. I think it would be fair to say that in recent years, finding ways to make the subject matter relatable has become more important, hasn't it? And I thought it would be interesting if we could look at your unseen clip from the Who Dares Wins Series 2 here, because it's really sort of almost any man could imagine themselves doing this thing. So do you want to just tell us a little bit? Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I was just thinking, actually, it's sort of interesting. I'll just say one very brief thing before that, because I feel a sort of duty bound to, which is that Murder Detectives, it was a co-commission between David Glover and Amy Flanagan. It's a hybrid program for us. It was docs and Specialist Factual. And we do that kind of thing a lot. So I've worked with David Brindley on The Vote in documentaries. Sarah Ramsey was working in entertainment on other commissions. Various people have sort of, teamed up in that kind of sort of hybrid way, and that's one of the things that we've done. And one of the reasons we've done it is that it seems to me this is relevant to the SAS clip. It's a mistake, I think, to start from the subject and then think, how do you make it relatable? As in, start from the academic subject. To start, say, let's do a bit of history. Right, how are we going to make that relatable? How should we illustrate it? Or start with a bit of science and think that. Much better, I think, to start with something that you find completely fascinating, exciting, compelling, a world, a place, a scenario, and then work out how you're going to sort of mine it for content. And that's why you end up with the sort of hybrid teams, because sometimes it takes a docs person and a Specialist Factual person to mine it for content, or a drama person and a Specialist Factual person to mine it for content. So this just came out of a conversation, the original series, SAS Who Dares Wins, one of our big hits last year, came out of a conversation about how interesting all the people are, the ex-Special Forces people are that we've met, and how they often appear on TV as one-dimensional action men, and there's a bit more to them than that. And could you go back at this quite traditional territory and just sort of change up a few things and do it in a different way? And to me, a few people have said to me, was that really Specialist Factual? Which sort of GCSE subject is that?
Yeah, what makes it Specialist
But
Factual?
to me, if the Specialist Factual is about how the world works, then how the SAS selection works is as much Specialist Factual as how the bread factory works, or how the railways work, or any of those other sorts of things. And it has layers and layers. I mean, the whole of episode 5 of the last series was a sort of long psychology experiment. So this is a clip from series 2. It's a sort of compilation of bits. I saw it half an hour ago, I think. It's quite sweary, sorry. They've been in the jungle in Ecuador for phase 2 of SAS selection. So
Okay, let's show that clip, please. Understanding the male psyche, really, isn't it?
Well, Colin texted me from the jungle in Ecuador and said, what we've created is a custom-built self-realization machine for men. And we had this kind of which it sort of is, and we had this joke. We used to refer to the series 1 when it had a title. The working title was sort of Life Tips for Men. So it's a sort of, yes, it is about that, really. But to me, it's an innovation story in a subtler and less obvious way than we often think of it, because we often think about technical innovation or sort of, other kind of really showy bits. But actually what happened there was, that's a docs team taking on a kind of content-rich Specialist Factual territory. And they did things like they brought the rig in to a constructed space. That's an interesting innovation to me. They found a way of explaining what was going on through anecdote rather than through explanation. So there was the plan was that the DS, the directing staff, would pop up and say, we're running up the hill because X, Y, and Z. But actually, when they did the interviews, it turned out that them telling stories from Iraq and Afghanistan was a much better way of explaining why things were done. And then the kind of curiosity, the generally higher level of curiosity about people get you into all those layers about sort of, about motivation, about masculinity, and about psychology. So yeah, I would defend that as Specialist Factual to the hilt.
And Ed, would you like that for Discovery if you had the chance?
That's a good question. I think yes and no. I think the problem when you're commissioning for international is that that show, it's beautifully made and I love it. However, I'm not too sure that it would travel very well because everyone thinks their own special forces is the bee's knees. And so if you went to Germany, I don't know who their special forces are, probably should do.
So this is kind of very British.
Yeah. And interestingly, we had a show out in Taiwan where they had their Taiwanese frogmen, and it did incredibly well. And we thought, ooh, this will probably travel, and it didn't. And so I think people are, you know, just like I think docs on British police won't really travel because everyone just thinks their own police is the best.
Indeed. So, Tom, if I can just ask you, you know, in your previous job you were specialist factual formats head of. I mean, are you going to, that is a format. I mean, you've got a lot of formatted shows that are coming through. Do you want to tell us a little bit about a couple of the shows you've got coming through?
Well, what's interesting, I mean, I loved that series because, and actually I think partly for different reasons to what John's articulated. I think it's because you're talking about relatability, and in some ways I don't find that series relatable at all. There's no way I would ever do SAS training. It's really unlikely for anyone who knows me. Yeah, no, it's not that funny. Am I? But I thought it was incredibly visceral and dramatic, and if relatable means it provoked a reaction in me, I guess it's relatable. I'm going to show you another clip. I've been given permission to show 2 clips because the first one's not mine really, or is newly mine, which I think is emotional in a completely different way. And again, anybody who's known me for a while knows that I sort of bang this drum along with my team quite a lot, which is how do you take specialist factual subjects and make them feel that they are directly relevant to people's lives. And so this is from a new format from Studio Lambert, which has the working title Big Life Fix. And it's our way or attempt of bringing technology, engineering, really super clever people, putting them onto BBC Two in order to help transform people's lives in ways that I think are extraordinary. So the clip you're going to see is a composite of a story. I hope it makes sense.
That's like a really interesting kind of taking intensely personal human stories and melding them together with...
And we take the science content in that series really, really seriously. And what's interesting is that we're not shying away from the process and the mechanics and the solutions that come up with, because that man would like to be able to use his camera in a way that doesn't hurt him anymore. And the solution is incredibly complex. But I think because you're invested in him and his very clear goal, I think you are interested in the science that goes with it. And it's quite complicated science. You know, someone came to me going, let's do a big series about technology. That's quite hard. You know, the received wisdom is that's quite a hard thing to put on television. But I think Studio Lambert have done an extraordinary job of taking the specialist factual content, if you like, really seriously. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned being a commissioner in sort of round this genre, is that you do need suppliers who don't come to you going, can I pitch you this features idea because you might like it, and Donna doesn't want to commission it, do you want to commission it? It's working with suppliers who understand that if they're going to do something with us, it may be a doc precinct or it may be a format, but there are a series of whys, you know, questions. And the thing that Craig, who works in my team, Lucinda and Elliot, I think we probably drive people nuts because we ask a lot of questions before things are commissioned. And I think that, again, it's what John was saying earlier, which is that curiosity thing, which I think is what drives those commissions. But, you know, this isn't a finished series yet, but I hope it's a direction of travel.
Okay, Lucy, how much time do you spend sort of trying to think of innovative ways to tell stories, and how much are you trying to kind of relate to your Channel 5 audience and give them what you know they already want?
I mean, you know, it's a combination of both, really. I mean, relatability is incredibly important for us, and we spend an awful lot of time thinking about it because, you know, as I said before, we're a broad, entertaining channel. So when we're doing specialist factual, it has to be something that's going to connect with our audience. But having said that, where we pick sort of very popular subjects, where they're kind of territories that we might have seen before, we're often thinking about sort of different and innovative ways into those. So I'd say that's the combination for us, really. It's sort of, if it's a history program or a history series and it's a very familiar period, how can we do that in a sort of slightly different, adventurous way, but a way that's still going to work for the Channel 5 audience? And that's what we want people to be thinking about, really.
And you've got an announcement to make, haven't you? You're sort of doing something quite unusual coming up.
Well, we are actually doing something quite unusual for us. So we are putting out a history tender, or we have put out a history tender. It's the first tender, I think, that we've put out for a while, certainly the first one that we've done since I've been at Channel 5, and the first history tender. It's for a new 8-part series on the subject of Rome. We've asked 5 companies who are sort of young, exciting, new companies that we as a channel haven't done very much with before, and they're companies that we're very excited by. So we've asked them to try and think about exciting, innovative ways to tackle a subject, which is a subject that we all know fairly well. So how can they come up with a sort of exciting new way of looking at this and a way that's going to work for us?
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about risk-taking, because that's all part of the process of what you do. I want to show your clip next, though, Lucy, and I know you were away on holiday, and actually what I want to look at, there's a particular clip, which is a clip about...
It's a bit buried in there somewhere,
Carol Vorderman. Look out for the Carol Vorderman clip as part of this, because actually Lucy's team have put together a selection of programmes that have already been transmitted, but then there are some programmes, it's only 2 minutes long in total, actually, and there are some programmes at the end. We're going to talk about those. So if we can show Lucy's clip, please. So we allowed Lucy a little trip around the block there. But what I want to talk about is the Carol Vorderman Commission, because that is a big risk for Channel 5, isn't it? Because who knows if she'll make it?
Exactly. It's a huge risk. And actually, before I talk about Carol, I mean, probably what I should say is that for Channel 5, most specialist factual commissioning is a risk. I mean, it's not... If we're BBC4, specialist factual is part of your DNA. At Channel 5, we're very proud of our specialist factual. It's really important to us reputationally. But it's not part of our DNA in the same way that it is for other channels. So in some ways, you could argue that anything that fits into that genre is a bit of a risk for us. But the Carol project is a particular risk on many levels.
How many programmes would it be? How many episodes?
There's going to be 3 episodes, and as you say, the big question is whether Carol will make it or not. She had always wanted to learn to fly, and she took flying lessons 2 years ago, got her pilot's license, and recently decided, having got her pilot's license, that she was now going to undertake this round-the-world trip. So if she makes it, she'll be only the 9th woman in history to fly around the world solo, which when you think about the fact that she learned 2 years ago and she's 56, I think just goes to show that perhaps you're never too old to give it a go.
Taking bets.
And exactly, whether she'll make it. I think the other thing, there's lots of risks on the actual journey, all sorts of issues about, how high she can fly, how long the fuel tanks will last for. She's had to think really carefully about her route. There's all sorts of countries she can't fly over. It's simply too dangerous. So lots and lots of issues around that. But I think what's also quite interesting is that, we'll be seeing Carol in a very different way, and it's a risk for us, but it's also a risk for her, because I think we're all very used to seeing Carol on Countdown, on Loose Women. It's Carol the presenter. This is Carol as the main character in an observational documentary. Carol without her makeup on, Carol in tears, Carol actually wondering whether she's even going to be able to take off, whether she'll make it. We've already had a big setback, which is scary and good at the same time. So, for us, I think it feels like a really exciting project and exactly the kind of thing that we should be doing, but a very risky project as well.
A few sleepless nights.
A few sleepless nights on that one, yeah.
Ed,
I should say, actually, it's an Arrow project, so I have faith in Arrow getting Carol around the world.
Ed, we're talking now about talent, and one of the defining things about specialist factual in recent years has been that, it's the old adage that people no longer want a man outstanding in their field, outstanding in a field. You want to use presenters and talent in new ways, and I wanted you to talk to me about Idris Elba and the way that you have made him your own in a way.
Well, I mean, Discovery is all about making your world bigger, and the way you do that is you take the viewer and the people you film with into very different places and out of their comfort zone. And, I mean, Idris is a funny one for us because basically in the male factual world is celebrity talent doesn't really or normally work. It's something that you see on more female-skewed channels, especially ITV, Channel 5. And I think that our viewers are kind of inherently slightly cynical, that they want to see kind of men's men doing real things, people who are relatable, that they can either aspire to or totally kind of understand who they are. And so Idris, I can't obviously tell you too much because this is not an announcement of the show. So we've got him on an extraordinary journey. And the challenge for us as a broadcaster is trying to make Idris relatable. And because I think people come to Idris with a preconception about who he is. You know, he's done so much drama. You've seen him in films and BBC dramas. And so trying to unpack him as a person. And I'm really excited. We're in the middle of production of this. We haven't really even entered the edit. And
But he shoots quite a lot of stuff
yeah,
himself, which is unexpected.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to show Idris in a way that's never been seen before. And in fact, that you'll very rarely see a person a celebrity of that caliber, a proper Hollywood A-lister. You won't have seen certainly him in this way, but many other people in this way before. So he does a lot of self-shooting, which is incredibly engaging. And we started it off as a conversation. Why don't you just film a few things? And when the rushes started coming back, we're like, bloody hell, it's really exciting.
Yeah. So he probably sees his future as a director, I bet.
Idris is great to work with. He's very collaborative, and he really knows his onions when it comes to drama. But he's fascinated by the world of documentary. He's an exec on this show as well. He's thrown himself into it, and I think it's fair to say that he's on a learning curve too. But it's great, yeah.
So you can't exactly tell us what it is, but we can have a look at it anyway. So
yeah,
let's
see if
play
you can
the
all
clip.
guess.
So in a way, he just becomes an ordinary bloke, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does, and I think that what that clip demonstrates is he's really let down his guard. And I think that, he talks about, you heard a little bit of his, the tattoo on his arm relates to his daughter's name. And I think that his whole persona in drama world is the big tough guy. And actually, I think you can see here that he's maybe not quite as tough as people thought he was.
You're getting under the skin.
Yeah.
Rachel, you've talked in terms of talent about how you're looking for kind of everyday experts, maybe experts that aren't normally associated. You've had some interesting Sean Ryder.
Yeah. I mean, exactly that. You don't very often see a kind of white man professor on history anymore. Years ago, occasionally as a talking head, like in something like Barbarians Rising.
But do you think, just interrupting you actually, do you think that specialist factual is still too dominated by the white, middle-aged expert man?
I think there's a really concerted effort to change that, and I think there's some brilliant women. I'm going to talk about history because that's my area, but I think there's brilliant women on TV. I think, are there enough non-white people? Possibly not. But it is about kind of, when you go into academia, it's difficult. So I think there could be more, and I think there is a move in history generally, both in academia and on TV, to tell stories from different angles, even more so than ever, and I think that will really help bring out different voices. But I do think it is important.
So tell us a bit more about the kind of everyday expert, if you like, the person who's not associated with the subject.
One thing, when we did a lot of audience research a few years ago, we realised that our audience tend to be, these are the guys that subscribe to Sky Sports. They probably didn't go to university, but they love history, and they sort of wish they paid a bit more attention at school, and they're actually a little bit scared of some of the sort of white professors, and actually would rather kind of chat to a guy that they sort of respect down the pub. When we talk about relatability, this is really important. So we started looking for more everyday experts, and the first thing that came through a few years ago was a series called Mudmen, which was we brought Johnny Vaughan back to TV for the first time. Johnny Vaughan is massively into history. Very quickly describe the series. We put him with a guy called Steve Brooker, who's a mudlarker. They would go down the River Thames every day, mudlarking, pulling up things out of the river, talking about history, and suddenly, people realise actually, history is not kind of academic. It's not the thing you learnt at school. It's just a subject at school. History is actually something else, and it's way more interesting than what you think it is. So, yeah, we did Shaun Ryder on UFOs, which was, again, the first time Shaun Ryder was back on TV after kind of swearing on, I don't know what it was, TFI Friday or whatever it was. That, again, was quite risky. Last year, we did Sean Bean on Waterloo. Sean Bean, obviously massive movie star. We, again, did some audience research. A lot of people said, I love Sean Bean, he's amazing. So we got Sean Bean on TV. He's never done documentary before. Massive risk for him, massive risk for us, but absolutely loves the story around Waterloo because he played Sharp in the ITV series.
And you've got coming up what sounds like another quite high-risk connection.
I'm not sure who that... We've done...
The Osbournes.
Oh, well, the Osbournes, yeah. So Ozzy Osbourne is doing a series on history with his son, Jack. Jack is a massive history buff and is determined to tell his dad the way of the world. So, and they basically go on a history tour. It's called Ozzy and Jack's World Detour. And they go around the world learning about history. And again, it's, you know, there's a real kind of father-son dynamic there as well, which we're finding from audience research, that our dads want to watch history with their kids. And actually, when you've got father and son duo on screen, that really encourages that viewership.
So I just want to ask John, before we move on to last question, and then I'll take some questions from the floor. Grace and Perry, I wanted to ask you about that, because that is, again, using a presenter in a really unusual way, in the sense he gets much closer to the subject than he's an artist, but he is also making art for the people that he's getting to know. So it's quite an unusual way of using talent.
It's the way we use all of our specialist factual talent, I suppose. They're more lead protagonists than they are presenters. They tend to be observed. I mean, I think that's a real difference with our output. You tend to learn things on Channel 4 Specialist Factual by watching people do things, rather than by them telling you things straight down the lens. And Grayson's one example. Guy Martin's the same. The SAS, DS are another example. I mean, you know, the psychologists in, I suppose the psychologists in 4, 5, 6, 6-year-olds, similarly, they're doing their job. We're watching them as they observe. So I think that's our mode, as it were. And Grayson's part of it.
Mm. Tom, in terms of talent, no, I'm coming to you because it's you've just taken on this new job, so obviously you're going to be very keen to impose your own thoughts onto this new post. Do you think that we'll see less of the sort of supremely experienced academic experts on the BBC and more everyday people? And can you just tell us a little bit about a couple of upcoming commissions that you're proud of, that sort of maybe give a glimpse of where you're going with Specialist Factual at the BBC?
I mean, I think the thing to say is, I think Martin's department have done an extraordinary job over the last few years, and I think there are, especially in terms of talent, I think if you think about some of the people that Martin's department works with really regularly, from Mary Beard, Brian Cox, what I love about Joanne Fletcher, what I love about those people actually is that, for me, when we talk about diversity quite a lot, and is it still the domain of the the white male academic, I think what's extraordinary about those three pieces of talent is, yes, Brian's white and male, but they have a sort of idiosyncrasy about them. They have a take on the world. In the office, people call them Marmite, which I think is trying to get at something quite specific, which is you remember them, they are uniquely themselves, they have a take on the world that I'm interested in hearing. So I feel incredibly committed to that. I also think one of the things that I would say about Specialist Factual at the BBC compared to other broadcasters, not every other broadcaster, but we commission a huge volume of Specialist Factual. So it's incredibly hard to define it in a single sentence and go, am I going to walk away from big landmark presented science? No. But one of the things that I've had the sort of privilege of being able to do the last few years actually is flirt a bit with other genres. The reason I was given a very specific remit was to go, well, if some of the shackles were taken away, what would Specialist Factual look like? But that wasn't a way of going, oh, there's an old way of making Specialist Factual and we're only going to have a new way. I think the challenge for the BBC is to go, if we're as committed as we've always been to that amount of Specialist Factual, how do you make each piece stand out on its own? I mean, I think I'm in a very different position to John, for example, because I think a lot of what I've got to do is go with that many, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of titles a year. How do you make each and every one of them feel special in the schedule?
So will it be a balance between returnable series and sort of really cementing those and bringing new things in?
So one of the things that I've always said is that I think there should be a balance. In a dream world, what you want is a balance of having titles which return year on year, that the audience know that they really enjoy, that give attribution back to the BBC, where people go, I love the BBC because that show's on, and it's on at a certain time of year, and it's on a certain day. And BBC One's done that brilliantly with Who Do You Think You Are, playing it in the summer, year on year. I think the audience, even if they don't put it in their diary and go, it's coming in August, there is a sort of sense that Who Do You Think You Are will come year on year. Over the last couple of years, my team has commissioned quite a few things, primarily on BBC Two, which have now started to return year on year. And I think that makes both commissioners and the suppliers who come and talk to us much more confident, because it means that we can take a risk over there, and it might work and it might not work, because we've got these things which we know have good audience share. We know the audience really like coming back. I think when you end up getting lost is when you've got a sea of lots and lots of disparate pieces that in and of themselves are all really good and well-intentioned and good commissions, but don't add up to anything. So I think part of what I'm going to hopefully try and do now, having sort of two genres come together, is go, how do you make some pieces feel like they're really, really big plays for the BBC, at the same time as making sure there's enough room to build the brands. And I think one of the things that, not Channel 4 Specialist Factual, but Channel 4 Factual has done so brilliantly is, and I can say this because I worked on 24 Hours on A&E years ago, so I'm not just being nice to Channel 4, I worked on it, is that there's something about the volume of those series commissions. If you commission 28, I think it's now 802, or however many, 40, 24 Hours in A&E, they feel like so confidently that they belong in the schedule. And I think that's happened at the BBC more historically, has happened with comedy and drama and entertainment, and it's starting to happen more and more in Factual. It's something that features have done very well, but some of the other genres, I think, have, we've been victims, I think, of our own desire to go, what's next, without going, hold on a second, this is really good and we could do it again.
Understood. So that's kind of the direction of travel. Lucy, just a last question, really. What do you think is the next big thing you'll be looking for? Can you see trends out there that you're...
Well, I think Specialist Factual is an area where there's always new trends. In fact, I think Specialist Factual actually is quite often at the cutting edge. I mean, natural history is always very driven by technology, so every time a new piece of technology comes along, you'll get a sort of movement in natural history.
Yeah, we haven't had a chance to talk about natural
we
history,
haven't, no.
but actually there is a lot of change in natural history in the way
Exactly.
it's
Started.
I mean,
all day.
I mean, I think, we've talked about it quite a bit on this panel, but I think sort of, drama is another big move, and I think it is a big one for us too. I think there will increasingly be much more blurring of genre boundaries. I think that sort of blurring between drama and Specialist Factual will become more acute. That's certainly an area we're really interested in, and it's working really well for us. We're looking at a couple of 2-hour specials in the area of history. We did one earlier in the year. So I think sort of more drama and history for us is really interesting.
more drama and history. Ed, anything looking forward that you're after?
I think, there are a couple of shows that I'd like to mention which are in production, which will be coming out later on, is Betty's Everest Rescue and Plimsoll's Life of Dogs. And then kind of as to the future of Specialist Factual, I think I'm very lucky to be working at Discovery. It's a privilege to work at a broadcaster that has very, very big pockets, and it means that we can go to places that maybe other broadcasters can't afford. We can tell stories in a unique way.
Actually, Life of Dogs is a good example in a way, isn't it? Because it's sort of natural history, but it's really relatable. Yes,
it's about, at its heart of it, the simple question at the heart of it is about man's relationship with dogs and how that's evolved over the years. And but there are some extraordinary scenes and really different ways of telling that story that you won't have seen in other kind of natural history. It's a blending of natural history and populist factual, I would say. No, it's an incredibly exciting time at D&I at the moment. And actually, just as what Tom was saying, is that we've got we're in a privileged position because we have tons of long-running, brilliant content, Deadliest Catch, Gold Rush, all those kind of things which prop up the schedule, which gives us the space to try and explore and do really different and innovative stuff.
Okay, so just very quickly, Barbarians Rise, and you've got a lot resting on that. Anything else exciting that you want to tell us about?
I've got something I can't say, which is really, really annoying. So, I mean, keep your eyes out next week. But certainly doing more in the sort of celebrity surprising talent on history, passion project space, for sure. They're really hard to put together because you've got to find a celebrity and you've got to find something they really love, and it's got to be about history, and they've got to be available when you need to do it. So we're doing those, but I think also...
We'll watch this space for next week.
Yeah, exactly. But I also think formats is really important in Specialist Factual. I think there aren't enough formats. I think male-skewing formats in Specialist Factual in particular is really, really hard. We've got a series called Forged in Fire, which is a US commission. We just launched it. It's doing really, really well, and it's about bladesmiths. We're calling it Bake Off with Blades. But more of those, I think that's what
that's where you're going.
Need. Yeah.
And just very briefly, John, now you're head of department.
Well, yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It's sort of listening to everyone. Everyone's at different points in the same cycle, wrestling with much of the same stuff, and it's almost like you crack one thing, you've got to solve another. So our story really is, we used to be the department of extraordinary one-offs, plane crash, mummifying Alan. Then we've hit this kind of series returnability scale thing, Secret Life, Walking, SAS, Guy Martin. I think our challenge for the next year is to build on that, but also to try and sort of broaden out the tone a bit and to get back into some of the more core sort of specialist factual areas. And, you know, like the sort of core history, the core science, we're in the middle of Rob Coldstream Week on Channel 4 this week, so there's an amazing film last night called Interview with the Murderer from ITN Productions rather. Tuesday night there's Rob's series commissioned from Outline, Born On. That's a sort of core history series. It's one of 3 big history series that are in production at the moment. So we're beginning to go that way a bit. Friday Night Goggles Brog, it's also him from Studio Land. But there's a bit more core history, a bit more core science. I would love to get into... I'm quite envious of your Big Life fix. It looked fantastic to me. It looked very emotional. But I'd quite like to get back into some of that sort of stuff with a slightly different tone to the sort of macho male stuff, and especially into that kind of how the world works precinct stuff. I think we'll do it differently. We're a different sort of feel and tone. So
lots more emotion, lots more using presenters in new ways, lots more new formats. Okay, we've just got a few minutes for some questions. We've sort of not touched as much as we have touched, as always, in the time available. But has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask? Just wait for a microphone and put your hand up. It's quite hard to see who's got their hands up, actually. Wave loudly if you have a question. Yes? No questions? We are actually nearly out of time anyway. So
I can tell a funny story.
Oh, go on, tell a funny story. That'd be very nice.
So when I've got 2 boys, an 8-year-old and a 7-year-old, and they're always asking me about the Idris project. And my Jack, my eldest, who was 8, was like, "Daddy, where's Idris at the moment?" I was like, "He's off in Japan." And he said, "Oh, what's happening there?" And I said, "Well, he's having sticks broken on him." And he went, "Why is that happening?" And my wife went, "Because Daddy says so."
You have it in your power.
Yeah, it's the only time I legitimately get to beat up a celebrity, which is fantastic.
Well, that's we look forward to seeing it when we know what it is. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up there. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much indeed to John Hay, Rachel Jobe, Ed Sayre, Lucy Willis, and Tom McDonald. Thank you.